Good afternoon, everyone. It's great to welcome you here to the third of our Strommen Executive Series events of the 2013-14 academic year. It says here, spring is an exciting time. I'm looking out the thing, I forget spring. Thank heavens this is happening today and not tomorrow, or none of us would probably be here. But the purpose of the Claire and Gladys Strommen Executive Speaker Series is to enrich student and alumni experience by bringing corporate leaders to campus to share their expertise. Launched 4 years ago, previous speakers in the series have included Mary Brainerd, the CEO of Health Partners, Sally Smith, the CEO of Buffalo Wild Wings, Doug Baker from Ecolab, and Richard Davis from U.S. Bancorp, just to name just a few. So we've had just a wonderful opportunity to engage with some of the leading corporate folks in our community and to hear from them on various topics. The topic this evening is finding vocation in corporate philanthropy. Now, for the students in the room, you know that vocation is at the core of Augsburg's mission. On any given day, I assure you, if I don't say it, someone is going to say the V word, as we call it here at Augsburg. The time that students step on campus, they are being asked to think through how their education prepares them, helps them to discern what their calling will be in the world, their vocation in the world. So first-year students participate in a seminar that helps them to reflect about that. We have our required courses in religion that actually focus in on the concept of vocation. And all of our students take a course in their senior year, a keystone course that brings together the concept of vocation with their particular majors. So a very powerful way that we are built this into the curriculum, and it's such a part of this community's calling and its own mission. And it seems to me very appropriate that we would have that topic tonight in the address that John Campbell is going to bring to us. So let me share a little bit about John's background. John Campbell is the Executive Vice President and Director of Community Relations at Wells Fargo, and has made it his life's work to ensure that corporations and nonprofits work together to create a stronger community for all. John brings the wisdom of 36 years of experience at Wells Fargo and coordinates Wells Fargo's giving programs. John served on many regional boards, including the National Urban League Board of Trustees, University of Minnesota Foundation. We're happy to have somebody representing the foundation with us here tonight. The University of Minnesota Carlson School Board of Overseers, Minnesota Chamber of Commerce, and the United Way U.S. National Board of Trustees. As I think all of us know, Wells Fargo has a strong history of giving back to the community. Their team members, of which I think there are a whole bunch of them, I saw across the back there, are involved in volunteer hours, 1.5 million volunteer hours a year, invested over $315 million in almost 20,000 nonprofits and schools nationwide in 2012. So it is a great pleasure to have John with us tonight on the topic of finding vocation in corporate philanthropy. John Campbell.
Good afternoon, everybody. You feel like you're a long ways away. So maybe I'll just come right out there with you. But it's great to be here this afternoon. I want to just, I checked some fun facts, knowing that I was coming to see all of you this afternoon, and the relationship that Augsburg and Wells Fargo has is actually pretty remarkable. Actually, the first account that Augsburg opened with would have probably been Northwestern National Bank in Minneapolis, was in 1912. So that's a pretty remarkable relationship, and the fact that we're still friends and we're still doing business together is actually great. We like to help scholarship programs. We've actually had a scholarship program here at Augsburg since, I think, 1976, where we helped 2 lower-income students from the state of Minnesota attend Augsburg, and we're proud to be able to do that. We believe that education is a core in this country, and without it, it's pretty hard to be successful, so we do a fair amount of scholarship work. We also believe in internships, and we know that in the summer it's pretty common that we have a number of Augsburg students who would be with us. Not only would they hopefully be learning from what we do, but at the same time we're paying them, so that's a pretty good deal. And I did check I violated one other rule today, and that was I did call Human Resources today, and I said, so if you go in the Human Resources system, could you just kind of give me a quick count of how many alumni are currently in the employ here in Minnesota? And the number was right around 100. So it is a meaningful relationship. So when I was asked to speak, it was actually an easy yes. One, Bankers learn early on that you always take good care of customers because they're very precious. But secondly, when I started to learn more about the citizenship programs and work that Augsburg did, it touched a nerve, and it became kind of a natural place for me to go spend some time, because I do believe that corporate citizenship is highly critical in this country and increasingly around the world. And so the fact that you put so much effort into it, it feels like a natural place. Now, I have to say, it's pretty amazing when you think about citizenship that, we think about Minneapolis, we think about Minnesota, we think about the Midwest, but Augsburg thinks substantially larger. I mean, to have the Dalai Lama here a few weeks ago, that is impressive citizenship, and we all should take our hats off to you for really being world leader. Bringing world leaders here is something you can be really proud of. So let's bring it back to just a local kid. What I'd like to do today is, first of all, I'd like to tell you a little bit about my role today at Wells Fargo. So that'll kind of be a little bit of context. And then after I do that, I'm going to take you through a meandering story about how I got into this job. And if you think it was planful or purposed, no, that's not going to be a story. Now, I can also tell you that there won't be much exaggeration. There might be a little bit. The reason there won't be much today is there are way too many people in the room who actually know the facts. And so I will be held to as close to the truth as possible today, because there are people who know. But let me just say a couple things about Wells Fargo to get us started. We have a really long history. We're now 165 years old. There are very few companies in the United States or the world who have actually been able to survive that long. So even though sustainability is a word that's a current buzz, whether it be sustainability about natural resources or weather or financial or you name it, sustainability is really hard to accomplish, and the fact that we're here 165 years later is actually pretty remarkable. We do have a history of strong values. I think one of the reasons we're still here are the strong values. As you've already heard from Paul, we are a large giver. We have a big commitment to diversity and inclusion. And there are a lot of things we do that are pretty important. When we think about corporate social responsibility at Wells Fargo, because we largely are the result of many acquisitions of many banks over a long period of time, our point of differentiation in comparison to some of our peers is our uniqueness is our localness. Most of what we do happens community by community, state by state, as opposed to a headquarters like in San Francisco. And that was clearly the case for those of you who may have grown up here with Norwest. It was bank by bank during the Depression. It really happened during the Depression. So our uniqueness is the localness. And as a result, there wasn't an organized corporate function called corporate social responsibility, because it was kind of in the fabric of our values, and it was done community by community, place by place. And in the mid-'80s, things started to change some, and we started to realize that not everything could be done locally, and so the notion of at least some enterprise-wide corporate social responsibility began to happen. So we started with some things around the foundation, etc. But it was a beginning, but it was not very robust because our business model was so decentralized. Frankly, we had a strategy, and that strategy worked really well. Our belief was if we could stay under the radar screen and deal with things one market at a time and stay out of the spotlight, things would work pretty well. So it was a very conscious decision to do things locally and stay under the radar screen. In 2006, things were starting to change. By that time, we'd become a pretty large player. We'd acquired Wells Fargo. And so by 2006, it was clear things were starting to change. This is the beginning, so I'm going to tell the Wells Fargo story, and it's going to connect to my own story in a few minutes. It was in 2006 that our current chairman, who I worked for at the time, he and I began a series of emails over a few weeks when I began to suggest the notion that maybe it was time to create a corporate social responsibility function at the enterprise level. So John Stump, native of Pierce, Minnesota, John and I sent emails back and forth for probably a few weeks. We actually designed what we have today. And I'll never forget the last email. John's email said to me, "John, we agree on the concept. Someday we will probably do this. Now is not the time." That was the end of the email. Interestingly enough, 2 years later, John became CEO, and the world changed. 2008, as you might remember, the beginning of the mortgage crisis happened at the end of 2007. We were the largest mortgage player in the country at the time. All of a sudden, our industry went from one of the most respected, highest reputation industries in the country to the lowest in a matter of months. And at the same time, guess what we did? We doubled the size of the company. We bought a bank in Charlotte, North Carolina called Wachovia. So literally overnight, a change in the economy, change in our industry, coupled by a change in our size. The old strategy of staying under the radar screen was no longer going to work. It was pretty clear that that was not going to be the case. And so, hold that thought. I want to finish the Wells Fargo story. I'll connect back to that story in a few minutes. But I would just simply say this, that it was at that point that it became clear that all of our stakeholders, our regulators, our legislators, our customers, our communities, had different expectations of us. And those expectations were substantially higher than they had previously been. And so we clearly had to take a more proactive approach to corporate social responsibility. Well, guess what? That framework that John and I had discussed a few years previously became the model. And we set off to do it. Interestingly enough, I was not the person to actually do it. That will come back in a few minutes. Someone else came back who'd been on a sabbatical, and Pat was offered this job, which was great with me, but the story will be filled in a few minutes. So let me tell you a little bit about what corporate social responsibility looks like at Wells Fargo today. Today, when we first put it together, we put a few groups together. So all of our philanthropy is part of corporate social responsibility. A group we call community development and community relations, environmental affairs, which is a very important piece of work, along with our reputation management work. So these were the original pieces of functions that we put into the group. At the time, we hired the McKinsey Consulting Group to help us look at some best practices in terms of design. Ultimately, we've expanded our corporate social responsibility group, and we added two other functions, which are not typically a part of these functions. We added, first of all, diversity and inclusion. It's typical in large corporations that diversity and inclusion is typically part of human resources. But our view was that diversity and inclusion is much broader than representation in the workforce. It's also about market share. It's also about advocacy. And so we believe we wanted to send a message that at Wells Fargo it was much bigger than representation in the workforce, although that's critically important. And then the one that I think shocked the world, and especially Bill Kelly, since he's sitting in the back of the room, we moved government relations into our group as well. And that one is a bit unusual. To have corporate social responsibility and government relations put together is not a common model, but we believe the following, that it's all about relationships, it's all about building relationships with key stakeholders, and frankly, legislators are a very important set of stakeholders. So we did not see the function as uniquely different than building stakeholders with people like Jesse Jackson at Rainbow Push. It's a different stakeholder, clearly, but it's still relationship management, stakeholder to stakeholder. So that's the group that we currently have put together in my group, and it's called Government and Community Relations. So, at Wells Fargo, when you're in government and community relations, you don't own anything, you don't manage anything. you are a convener, you're a partner, you're a co-partner, you're an influencer. But nothing that we do we do by ourselves. We have to do it in partnership with other parts of the company. Let me give you an example, environmental affairs. We've reduced our greenhouse gas emissions by 23% since 2008. That's a pretty good start. But I'm here to tell you that corporate social responsibility couldn't do that at all. That work is accomplished because of really three important things. One, we haven't built another data center to suck more electricity out of the wall since we merged the companies. We've actually reduced our data centers. Corporate properties. If it weren't for corporate properties, retrofitting our buildings or building LEED certified buildings, we couldn't get there. If it weren't for our supply chain team focusing on our vendors to make sure that our vendors are highly responsible, it wouldn't work. If our travel people let us get on any plane we wanted any day and travel wherever we wanted, we wouldn't be able to do it because Wells Fargo's footprint is made up of electricity and travel. It's all the things that we plug into the wall, and it's all the times we get on the airplanes. And so while my team convenes and influences and harangues, and once in a while I even whine, the reality is we're a convener, we're a facilitator. Another example of convening, philanthropy. So yes, the foundation reports to me, but guess what? Those decisions were made 20,000 times in cities all across the country. So once again, it's not my group making the choices, it's community by community, market by market, making choices on what are the most important things in their markets that need to be done. But yes, it's coordinated. Increasingly, we're trying to pick a few focus areas, and we're putting a lot of time and effort into making sure that we can actually measure the outcomes of what we do. Another example, team member volunteerism. Actually have good news. It went up to over 1,600,000 hours last year. Again, my people aren't the 1,600,000 hours. It's the 265,000 team members across Wells Fargo. Our role, once again, is to help convene and coordinate and create opportunities. And we have team support mechanisms of numerous pieces that really make up the difference. But again, you know, we don't own it. We're simply trying to coordinate it. Another place I spend a lot of time, and we learned this lesson the hard way, in the mortgage business. So while, you know, the mortgage business greed did take over, and it wasn't just greed in the mortgage business, it was the investors, it was everybody in the chain. Everybody wanted more, and guess what? Everybody got more. Problem was that a lot of people were hurt dramatically in the process. So we learned through that really tough process that, you know, proper product selection, proper product design is critical. In the old day at Wells Fargo, the product groups in the lines of business made the product decisions. They designed the products, they ran the products, etc. It's no longer what we do at Wells Fargo. Today, anytime a product in Wells Fargo is either going to be modified or a new product is coming forward, one of the process steps that I've helped engineer and put in place is that that line of business has to run it through a reputation screen. There are 16 parts to that reputation screen, and if it comes out yellow, that product is on its way to my desk. And when it gets to my desk, I have one of two choices. I can either actually say, I understand the reputational risks. I think they're risks that are reasonable for Wells Fargo to take and our mitigation is appropriate. I approve for that to move forward. Or I can say, I'm not comfortable. We need to escalate this to the very top of the company to make a decision whether we're going to go forward. Now, in the old days, price made those determinations, credit risk made those decisions, reputation risk many times wasn't a factor in those product decisions. They are today. Let me give you an example. A few weeks ago, our investment banking group had been asked by a customer, an investor, to go out and buy a number of non-performing mortgages. That means those were mortgages that were probably already in foreclosure. They were not mortgages that Wells Fargo owned. They were not mortgages that Wells Fargo had initiated. They're mortgages that somebody else had bet, and the foreclosure process was going on. These investors believed that if you could buy them at the right price, you could make money on the other side. So the product was brought forward. It certainly set off the bells and whistles. It got on my desk, and I called the head of investment banking, and I said, I tell you what, I'm not approving this one. I said, not in this environment. And I said, frankly, you're not going to make enough money anyway, but frankly, it's the wrong thing for us to do. For us to have anything to do with non-performing mortgages that we didn't originate is wrong. He said, well, here's how we're going to mitigate it. We had a great discussion. We know the rules. We both knew where we were going. We rehearsed. I said, this is what I'm going to say. He said, this is how I'm going to mitigate it. We said, great, go to the meeting. Went to the meeting. Here's the best part of the story. So I went first, said why I didn't think we should do it. His team came second, did a great job on how they felt the risks had been mitigated. We were about to the vote, and the head of investment banking said, you know what? There's no reason to vote on this. It's pretty clear. We shouldn't do this. We withdraw this idea. We're not going to pursue it. I'll call the customer, tell them we're not going to do it. That is a huge change. 5 years ago, that discussion might have happened, but the odds that it would have programmatically process-oriented happened is zero. That's the sort of change that's going on, not just at Wells Fargo, but across companies all across all the industry. So it's a really big deal. One last thing I want to say about that before I talk about myself and how I got here is in diversity and inclusion. You know, how do you hold people accountable for diversity and inclusion? So it's easy to walk around and talk about diversity and inclusion, right? We all got a speech. We can all give the demographic imperative that says, if you can't figure it out, you're not looking very closely. This world is changing, and you need to figure out how to be an active player in a diverse world that's becoming more diverse every day. So we all got the walking around speeches, but how do you get 270,000 people to actually take action? Well, one thing at Wells Fargo I learned a long time ago is what you track and what you pay people to do, you get done. And so 3 years ago, I was able to convince our head of human resources and our chairman that all of his direct reports had to have 10% of their compensation at risk based upon performance on a range of diversity and inclusion metrics. And those metrics included 4 things. One was representation of gender and race and ethnicity and the top 4 levels of their organization. Second, it had to be their market share in diverse segments. Third, it had to be their spend on supplier diversity. And fourth, it had to be their personal role around advocacy. Didn't get a lot of attention in year 1, got more attention in year 2, and last year it got a lot of attention. It's starting to make a difference. So again, is it very novel? No, not really. But it was the fact that I worked for a company who understood we needed to do something. I just happened to be fortunate enough to have made a suggestion, and it now seems to be making a difference. So there are a lot of things I could talk about as it relates to Wells Fargo, but I'm going to save those stories and tell you my story and see if I can connect the dots for you. So let's talk about how I got here. Well, I can tell you I am honestly in my dream job. I heard someone else say that 2 days ago. She's in the audience. So there are at least 2 of us in the room who are in our dream jobs. I hope there are more of you, because if you're lucky enough for that to happen, it's pretty good. Let me tell you my story. So I grew up in a small town in southern Minnesota. My dad was a banker. Isn't that a shock? My parents were the leaders in the community. It didn't matter what happened. They were involved. It didn't matter which side of the tracks you lived on. If you needed something, they were there to help you. And they had great respect for everyone, no matter what your background was. So I grew up in a good place, but it wasn't really until my mid-30s that this began to show up in my own personality. In the mid-30s, I ended up in Arizona. I ran our business in Arizona for 10 years. And we bought a very small bank in Phoenix, and frankly, When you're like number 5 market share, trying to carve out a living is pretty tough. So I decided, there was a book around the time called Guerrilla Marketing. Anybody ever remember that? Guerrilla Marketing? And you were supposed to pop out behind the trees and, surprise people. Well, my guerrilla marketing, I decided was going to be we were going to win the community over. Because from a business standpoint, we didn't even know what was going on in town. Nobody would tell us they were about to buy something or they were going to build. They would never think about coming to us to do that. So I said, well, we got to get to know the people who actually make stuff happen around here. So we began to get active in the community, and I became very active in the community. Long story short is I met the people who knew what was going on. And guess what? Before long, I knew what was going on. And before long, guess what? We got to bid on those opportunities. And guess what? A little bit later, we actually started to win some of that. But that's not the important story. The important story was I got a taste of what it was like to be a community leader. And it was exciting. And Greater Phoenix Leadership was a great group. The chamber was great. I started hanging out with a good friend at the Urban League. Good friend Pete Garcia ran the Hispanic organization, and these guys became my buddies. And they started to look out for me and I for them, and I started to realize the value of community leadership. I'd seen it in a town of 800, but I didn't know it was possible in a city the size of Phoenix. But it was. So that was an important step for me. It was also there that diversity and inclusion became important to me. And this is another lesson I learned, how you can turn adversarial relationships into something positive. So when I went to Arizona, we were buying a bank from Citibank, and they had a couple branches up on the Navajo Nation. Navajo Nation didn't like Citibank. Citibank didn't like the Navajo Nation. It was not a good relationship. There's a law in this country called Community Reinvestment Act, CRA, and it allows people like the Navajo Nation to protest an acquisition because on the grounds that you haven't served the needs of the community. So first thing I did, I flew up to see the Navajos, said, I'm a good guy, you can trust me, you can trust Wells Fargo, you don't need to file a protest. Next morning, the chief called me, and he said, John, you are a pretty good guy, we think that's probably true. This Norwest thing doesn't sound bad, but we don't get many chances. And for us to not file a complaint to try and block your deal would be silly. So they did. Guess what? 10 years later, when Norwest bought Wells Fargo, who do you think went to the CRA hearing to stand up for Wells Fargo? The Navajo Nation. It was those 10 years of me going to the nation, and I learned to drop the suit and the tie real fast. And by the time I left, they invited me to a sweat lodge. But that was, for me, the beauty of how you can go from adversarial. And by the way, guess what? We're making $1 million a year on the nation by that time. We built 4 branches. It turned out to be a home run. But that was the beginning of my diversity when I saw what was possible, and I got a passion. And to this day, I have a passion for the Navajos because of what I learned. In any case, during the 90s, my jobs continued to expand. I came back here and jumped right into community here because I'd had the experience. And so it was natural to come here. I was on way too many boards. I had way too many things going on. But what I learned here was the combination of public and private. And actually when it came together for me was, how many remember the increase, remember the constitutional amendment on gas taxes, on motor vehicle taxes? When you write your sales tax on a motor vehicle, it used to go into the general fund. Now it goes to transportation. Actually, I helped lead that constitutional amendment that said that money should be used for transportation, not other purposes. Remember the last gas tax increase? Yeah, that was me too. And tell you what, that's where I learned public and private. Had to work with county commissioners, state legislators. I remember cutting a deal at the state on the amount of the gas tax the day it passed. It was a fascinating experience, but I learned firsthand it could be done. And believe me, when I went to the Minnesota Business Partnership and told Bob Elrick and Jim McNerney that we were going to raise taxes for transportation, you might guess how that went. But you know what? They were good about it. By the time it was done, the business partnership was neutral. The chamber was in favor. But somebody had to take the lead, and we created a really big tent. We had the most amazing group of people who would come together to try and get that done. But the long story is, I then was able to go from community to see how community and corporate together could make a difference. And that really lit my fuse. Well, then I had another lesson. The mortgage crisis you've already heard about hit, and I got to see it firsthand. And I got another experience around what happens. And let me tell you a story about that. I'm going to tell you two stories about the mortgage crisis so you got a sense of how I've ended up where I've ended up. First one was 2008, March of 2008. The NAACP filed a lawsuit against Wells Fargo. Really ugly allegations. It said that we had targeted low-income, ethnically diverse people and steered them into higher-priced mortgages than what they were eligible to get. Pretty tough allegations. Wells Fargo hadn't learned its lesson quite yet. I'll never forget what we said in response to that one. We said, we are categorically not racist. That's what we said. That's what we said. 8 months later, NAACP dismissed the lawsuit against us after some of us spent months with the NAACP trying to figure out how to deal with it. It was an adversary, and to this day, one of my good friends is Ben Jealous, who just retired as president of the NAACP. Ben and I sat across the table in an adversarial relationship. On the other end of it, I had him come back to Wells Fargo a few weeks ago and speak to all of our communicators about, how that relationship changed. Second example, Reverend Jesse Jackson was trying to get a hold of my boss, or chairman, and John can't take every advocate's call. And so my job was to become the surrogate for John. And I was failing miserably. Jesse's, if you've never dealt with him, he's quite a guy. And he's pretty clear on what he wants. So finally I said to John, what we got to do is, you got to take the phone call. We'll get on the phone with Reverend Jackson, and I'll try to conveniently move him off to me. John said, okay, that's great. So we got on the phone. I tried literally twice, and Reverend Jackson said, no, I want him. So I remember, and I'll never forget what I said next. I said to Reverend Jackson, so you got an event coming up anywhere in the near future where you want to get a piece of some banker really good? You want to get a really good piece of somebody? He goes, and my boss is, no, John's. Where is this going? And Reverend Jackson says, at Ebenezer Baptist Church in Atlanta, Reverend King's church, we've got a meeting coming up in a couple of weeks. And frankly, I think those pastors in the Southeast Conference wouldn't mind having somebody to get a piece of. And I said, well, I'll tell you, here's my deal. You get me, I'll be there, but John's not your guy. I am. Here we are a few years later. We have now trained 20,000 of Rainbow Push's parishioners through their 1,500 churches on financial education. And again, I'll never forget. How many of you have ever been at Ebenezer Baptist Church, where Martin Luther King's mother was killed at the organ, believe it or not? And you're in the basement, you're the only white guy in the place, and they want a piece of somebody. And then and so if you want to have it, the thing I've learned at Wells Fargo, if you want to make a point, Don't send me in to do it. Take the people who can make a difference. And that day I did. I took the guy who ran mortgage servicing for us. Michael was new in the job, white guy from Des Moines. You can imagine, 2 white guys in Atlanta. We got done with the meeting and we behaved pretty well. We went back to the bank. Of course, we go from the church basement, we go back to this big walnut paneled office, and we're sitting around and kind of debriefing. And Michael said to me, he said, "I will never go through this again." And I thought that he was mad at the event that had just occurred. So my classic mediator said, "Oh, take a deep breath. It's okay." Trying to calm him down. He goes, "I will never go through this again." And I'm still confused. So I'm trying to say, "Don't worry." He goes, "John, you're missing my point. We're better than that. And we let people down, and we're never going to do that again." My lesson was, in a big company, it's easy to send front people out, send the lunch guy out. I'm the lunch guy. Let's just be clear. I'm the lunch guy. Send the lunch guy out. Let him figure it out. Doesn't do any good. You got to take the people who do the real work. That changed how Michael saw his job from that point forward. It changed the way we did things. Not because I went, but because when you go into the tough spots, the people who have to do the work, if they actually see what the implications are, it changes how they feel about things. So, long story short, let's go back to 2008. Remember the story in 2006? I'd made the suggestion about what we might do in corporate social responsibility. Meanwhile, what do you think I was doing? I was doing mergers and acquisitions. Okay, so I'm now running around the country doing deals. I'm buying banks. I'm Mr. Wall Street investment banker. I wasn't the smart guy on the team, let's just be clear. I was the lunch guy there too. And so when you went to Spokane, Washington, you were there for 2 days. By the end of the second day, every bank in town knew, "Oh yeah, the lunch guy was here for a couple of days. Did he come and see you? How much did he offer you?" Anyway, I was doing mergers and acquisitions. When we bought Wachovia, my job was done, because it's a little known fact, but in this country, when you get more than 10% of the total deposits in the country, you can't buy anymore. Well, we got to 10% with Wachovia, so my job was done. So I was prepared to say it's been a great run, pack it up and go home and try a new gig. Much to my surprise, remember I told you somebody else got the job when we started the corporate social responsibility function? Well, what I didn't tell you is when she got the job, I called her up immediately and said, "You know what, Pat, I am really happy the company's doing this. I am thrilled that you got the job, and if I can ever help you out, let me know." She said, "Well, you could." So she came back in the job, and every month we'd get on the phone with each other for about an hour. And we'd just talk to each other about what she was observing, what I was observing, and how she was going to build the function out and what she was going to do. Got to November of 2008, after the injunction that allowed us that said city really couldn't buy Wachovia, and we could, I called Pat and said, and she was going to become the transition manager for the merger. So I called Pat and I said, "Well, my M&A job's done. If you've got anything you need me to do in the merger, just let me know." So 2 days later, she called me back. I was driving back from Mankato. I remember I was on another M&A call, down calling on a banker in Mankato, trying to buy a bank. Driving back, Pat called and said, "Would you like to run corporate social responsibility for the new company?" And it was an opportunity too good to say no to. And so even though I had no training, I had no skills, I got to do this. And so that's how I got here. I do think some things helped along the way. I do think the involvement in the community made a difference. I've learned a lot of things in the community, some good and some not so good. I've been on lots of boards. I've had moments on boards where I was really proud. When you cut the ribbon for the new children's hospital across the street, it's a pretty proud moment. When you cut the ribbon for the Maple Grove Hospital, it's a pretty proud moment. When you end up in front of the Attorney General because of a vendor, it's a really shitty moment. When you go to the proms in London with the orchestra at the top of their game, it's a pretty special moment. When your maestro quits because of labor conflicts, it's pretty crappy. So what I learned is, in the community, just like any other business, you got to create change. Things can't stay the same. And, you know, if you're going to be a leader, you got to be prepared that there'll be the high moments and the low moments. And so while my public life is, at least in this city, is largely drawing to a conclusion, I have a new public life. I'm now working on national issues. So now I'm the treasurer of the National Urban League. I'm having a ball. We're going to build a new building in Harlem. We're going to put our museum there. It's going to be our training center. Last week I was in Atlanta looking at with the Urban League's Entrepreneurial Center in Atlanta to help small businesses grow. So I think I'm in a good position. So the highs and lows of community leadership help me greatly in my job. When I'm out working with other nonprofits, when I'm helping Wells Fargo think about what we're going to invest in, having sat at those boardroom tables and learned the highs and the lows, it makes it a lot easier for me to, you know, actually counsel Mark Morial. Mark's the president of National Urban. Mark and I are good friends. But because I've been through some of my own trials and tribulations as a community leader, you know, Mark and I can have a different kind of discussion because, you know, I've seen the goods and the bads. And so for me, it's a combination of the professional training that I was able to get at Wells Fargo. And I did lots of different things, everybody. I was a loan officer. I did credit administration. I ran retail branches. I did mergers and acquisitions. As you can tell, this was not a purposeful trail. The only thing purposeful about it was the desire to actually make a difference in communities. And to this day, at our size, Wells Fargo actually now has a chance to make a difference. You know, when you contribute $300 million a year, you know, that's a lot of money. And if we make good choices on what to do with $300 million, you can make a difference. When you're the largest mortgage lender in the country, you can either do things right or wrong. And if you do them right, others are going to follow you. If you do them wrong, others are going to follow you. Let me give you an example of that. After the hurricane on the East Coast, you might have understood, insurance on mortgages is difficult. When you rebuild, they give you part of the money, and then when you're completely done, they give you the rest of the money. And frankly, in the middle, you're screwed because you're trying to get something repaired and you don't have the money to repair it, and the contractors are not very happy with you. We said, no, we're going to change those rules. We're going to let you have the money up front. We're going to try, and we had some criteria, but we said we're going to let you, the consumer, you can have the money so you can pay your contract so you can get back in your house. Interesting enough, Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac, the two biggest lenders in the country, were still doing it the old-fashioned way. We finally said to Fannie and Freddie, look, if a private lender like us is willing to take the risk, what's wrong with you guys? Guess what? They followed along. You know, scope and scale's got a lot of negatives. A lot of negatives. I mean, let's be clear, being big is not necessarily great. But if you use big the right way, it can be helpful. And I think that's the trick, is can you use your scope and scale to do something right, or do you do it to perpetuate things that aren't right? And so we try really hard to try and do the right thing. Now, we're not perfect. I'm going to end by saying this. We are not perfect. We make mistakes every day. I think the change in our attitude in the past few years has been, and this is part of what I do for a living. In the old days, because we really do have strong culture, if we said, we used to say something like this: no, we didn't do that because our culture and our values say we wouldn't do it, so we didn't do it. I'll give you a good example of that. How many of you remember what robo-signing is in the mortgage foreclosure space? Remember that? Well, we had a really embarrassing thing happen. At an earnings release, about the time robo-signing was breaking out, someone asked our CEO, do you have any robo-signing at Wells Fargo? And believe me, we had been through this 100 times, and the answer was always no. So John said what we believed to be the case: no. A week later, we found out that we hadn't asked the question quite right. And yes, we had evidence of robo-signing too. It was at that point that we said, you know what? We got to change our ways. And some of us have got to play a little meaner inside. So if somebody says we don't do it, somebody better check a third and fourth time to make sure that that's really the case. And so today, part of what I do, actually, I am the guy who has the ability to go around and, well, the correct terminology is I get to create courageous conversations. Actually, what I do is I go into the room, I take a grenade out of my pocket, I pull the pin out of it, I throw it on the floor, and I leave the room. But increasingly, big companies have to have the ability to go in and dump the place upside down. And that's why I have my dream job. I am rather suspicious. I am cynical in a way. And so to be given the chance to go in and debate products, debate process, tell senior managers they don't have enough diversity in their senior leadership team, I mean, that's pretty fun to have a license in a big company to go around and create courageous conversations. So I will say this. There are many careers in corporate social responsibility coming in this world. Many. So this country's been at it for a while. We're getting better at it. We're going to have to get substantially better at it than where we're at today. So there'll be lots of opportunities for a lot of people to do this. I always get asked at Wells Fargo, because it's kind of a mission-based gig, so it's pretty cool. If you're mission-based, you can go off and do this stuff, and it seems pretty fun to give money away. And I always say, you know what, the only way you're going to get a job in Wells Fargo in that space is you got to prove you got a passion to be a community leader. If through your actions you can prove to me you want to be a community leader, pretty good odds I'll find a job for you. But I want to see you go out, scrape your knees, bruise your elbows, and demonstrate you're willing to actually have the passion to be a community leader. If all you want to do is write checks and go stand there with the big Wells Fargo check, this isn't the place for you. If you're willing to have the courageous conversation with the product people to say no, or to tell the head of wholesale banking that we're not going to finance that coal miner because they're a mountaintop miner and they're taking the tops off mountains and we don't do that. I mean, if you don't have the courage to do those sort of things, this is not the place for you. So I'll stop. I'd love to take some questions. I hope it's clear to you. I have a great passion for this. I don't know where it goes from here. I have a few more years. I have a lot more stuff I want to get done at Wells Fargo. We've come up a pretty rapid rise in the last 5 years. We're a little bit at a plateau right now. I got a whole bunch of stuff on my list that I need to get done because we got a lot of things that still need to get more progress. So, be happy to take your questions. Go ahead.
I'm just curious if a banker in California, can they talk about your corporate responsibility and what it means to their community?
Yeah, it's a great question. If you look at my goals, in number 5 spot is telling the story. We do a lot of good things, but getting that story out is really important. And frankly, if you go back to what I said, the culture we came from was under the radar screen. So to go from under the radar screen to telling the story, it's a pretty big shift. And so we're spending a lot of time helping people become more comfortable. The other thing that drives me nuts is a lot of people can tell the story, but it's usually a spin. And frankly, if I catch us spinning, it gags me. And so we're trying to find appropriate ways to tell a story. We've not believed in reputation advertising, although you will see some reputation advertising in the next few months. I've fought it. I've been uncomfortable. But in the third quarter, you will see some national reputation advertising around Wells Fargo based upon a program we helped design where we've given, to date, $170 million to down payment assistance to families across 25 cities. $15,000 to $30,000 per family. We now have over 5,000 families who own homes because of the down payment assistance. So you will see some advertising on that. That's a great story. I won't tell it. If you want to hear it later on, I'll tell you how that came about, because that didn't happen because of Wells Fargo. That actually happened because of Mark Morial, my friend at the Urban League, and a meeting Mark and I had with an idea. That's where stakeholder engagement matters. Wells wasn't smart enough to figure that out. Mark figured it out.
By the way, United Healthcare does a decent job of telling the story in the market.
Yeah, so we know we've got more to, telling the stories, number 5 on my list. Yes?
What are some of the guiding principles that you use to determine philanthropic investments, grants, gifts, or however you determine what they are?
So it's a great question, and the answer is every way possible. So what are the things I alluded to that I want to do before I'm gone? At Wells Fargo, what I said makes us unique is our localness, but at the same time, to connect the dots, we're not known for anything when it comes to philanthropy. So we're known as a really good giver. I mean, when you give 20,000 checks at $275 million, that's a pretty good giver. But in terms of are we known for making a difference in something, the answer is no. So frankly, what we do in Los Angeles is driven by what we think is important in Los Angeles versus what we do in Atlanta is driven by Atlanta. I've started a project at Wells where we're going to try and find a little different balance, where we're going to pick 2 or 3 major causes that we as an entity are going to get behind, and then create freedom in a framework at the market levels where we narrow their focuses a bit. So we are going to begin to move to a more focused approach. I would speculate, don't anybody go tell everybody this, but it'd probably be in areas like housing, financial education, and small business. Those are all places that, and environmental. So I think it'd probably be 4. Because in my research right now, where we play, the things we can actually make a difference with, not just with our dollars, but with our business, clearly we make a huge difference in the housing business. We've already proven that with, 5,000 homeowners. We've trained 20,000 homeowners, even though they haven't bought a home yet, to be prepared. Small business is critical to this country. We're the largest small business lender in the country. We better be doing some things there. The greening of the economy, critically important. We can play a space there. So, and then, the income divide, the wealth gap, whatever you want to call it, we can't solve that problem at Wells Fargo, but, there's a whole population of underbanked in this country, and that's a place we can play. So I'm just giving you a sense of where you might see us emerge. So I don't want to take away this importance of community solutions, community by community, but I do think there has to be a little more balance toward being known for something where we can measure our outcomes and be a bit more of a philanthropist. So I don't want to continue to just be a really good giver. I don't want to become a complete philanthropist. I'm all about kind of balance. It's somewhere in the middle. There's a pretty nice sweet spot, I hope. 3 years from now, that'll be done. Yes?
Hi. On a personal level, how do you decide what boards you're going to be on?
Well, there are a few I should have skipped, but no. Well,
Well,
I'll give you an example, yeah.
I'm on one board, and one of my concerns is that I'm seeing a lot of people who have much, much more difficult jobs than I have as a small business owner.
Oh, you have a really hard job.
But I'm not working 80 hours a week, and I'm curious about people who are choosing to be on 10, 15.
You can't do that.
Right, and so
Can't
I'm
do
kind of
that.
curious as to how.
Well, I'll get, the most organized I've ever been is when I moved back here in 2002. So I knew when I came back that part of my job, I knew it was a combination. It was part of my job. It was also part of my passion. So when I came back, I had a very thoughtful approach. I said, I want to do the following. I want to do one health care deal, because health care was important to me. And I knew health care was changing, so I wanted to be somewhere around health care. So that was 1. 2, I wanted to do something in the arts, and music was my preference. So I was real clear. I'll do one in the arts, and it was going to be music. And then third, I said, I want something that's a broader social services. And so I had a very clear view on what I wanted to do. Unfortunately, I started to violate that after a few years and ended up in a few other places. But I think then I regained my discipline. And as you could hear, I made a very clear choice to move from local to national. And so I think you need to be deliberate. Just like Paul said at the beginning, the V word, what's your vocation? I think if you're going to be a community volunteer, try to have that same focus. What's driving me? What's my passion? You can't be on a board with no passion. You're going to check out. That's silly. All you are is on the left-hand column of the stationery. And there are a lot of people who want people on the left hand. Oh, and you get to write checks too, by the way. I mean, get you on there and write checks. For me, if I can't kind of, okay, can you tell I like to stir stuff up yet? Is that clear? If I don't think I can help stir stuff up, probably not a place for me. So for me, I'm an activator. I like to create change. I like to get things moving. And so for me, I'm looking for places where there's maybe something that needs to change. And boy, do you learn a lot. And as I said, you get some arrows in your back when you're out trying to change stuff. Yes, go ahead.
My question is both professionally and personally. Have you ever done or considered supporting chronic illness causes? Yes. One of my very first volunteer activities, I was at the American Cancer Society, and remember when we used to do door-to-door crusades? Yeah, I ran the crusade in St. Paul for 2 years. So I go back, and I stuck around the American Cancer Society for quite a while. Currently, on a very personal level, Susan and I are active with the Alzheimer's Association. My mother passed away from Alzheimer's, and so we have a personal passion for that. And I try not to, the one rule I have is what I believe in personally doesn't mean Wells Fargo has to do that. And so, if Wells wants to do something around, those things, they can. But for me personally, those are the two I've had personal experience with. Yes?
You talked quite a bit about community engagement and also at the national level, being involved at the national level. But I also think that the world is becoming a global village. I'm from
Yeah.
a different continent. And I also look at, work in Africa and South America as community work as well. So what's your take on that?
Well, I think you're right. Wells, so this will be professional and personal all bound up in one. Wells is primarily a domestically based operation. 98% of our revenues are here in North America. And as a result, we clearly we don't have the global experience. Now, we have begun to expand globally in a couple of ways. One, in our correspondent banking business, we're expanding our business. We're in 26 countries in that business now. We have also done some offshoring. We have about 5,000 team members in India. They're doing great work. We're thrilled with what they do. We have about 600 employees in the Philippines. So we have begun an international philanthropy program. We started it about 2 years ago. It's not big at this point. At this point, we use United Way worldwide to help us facilitate that, because we yet don't have the scope and scale to be able to actually manage that on our own, to make sure that the right organizations are actually who are capable of using the money. So so this fall I'll be in the Philippines, I'll be in Singapore, I'll be in India, as we are starting to build out. So we're about 2 years into it. It's very early. At this point, it's driven mostly by our team members, especially in India. The team members in India they're highly engaged. And we really like to support them in activities that are important to them at this point. And then natural disasters. I mean, when there's a natural disaster somewhere,
we're at that pretty quickly. That's not what you were really talking about, but an important part of our giving. Where are we at, Paul? We got
One more question?
one more? Okay. I don't know. Is this going to be on television or what?
I don't have my camera.
Okay, good. I'm a little relieved.
You talked about how leaders create change and that arts were a passion for you. And you were on the Minnesota Orchestra Board. And actually what was happening was part of our coursework last fall was to watch.
Oh, great.
And,
Oh, boy.
By the way, it was a mediation class. So what can you share with us as to what was going on behind the scenes? Because what was reported in the public did not really pull back the.
Well, the media always has it right.
But there was not a lot of information that the media had access to, so I'm kind of curious because this was a long process and it was hard to see our orchestra not playing, but it didn't seem like the issues were out there to understand what was going on. So what can you share? What change did you make as a leader in the whole process? Anyways, that's the question.
Well, I'm not sure I was very effective. So many things I could talk about. Let me try two things. First of all, part of a leader's responsibility from my perspective is look far enough into the future to be able to see what's going to happen. And unfortunately, there's a major shift going on in the classical music. The audiences are changing. Things are changing pretty dramatically. Twin Cities is highly fortunate. We have an extraordinary orchestra. We had an extraordinary community who created an endowment that was substantial. We also had an organization that lied to itself for 10 years in that it said it was making money and it was not. And so this is the tricky part where mission and business skills sometimes get confused. So from a missions and so if you come in with a curious analytic business mind, you quickly look at the financial sustainability of the model. And it was clear to the board that it was not sustainable. So I think what was going on was nothing, unfortunately. I think you read it pretty accurately. You had two parties who were stuck at polar opposites, efforts to bring in amazing mediators, couldn't break the stalemate. Both parties believed their position was right, and frankly, neither party was really willing to budge. Until it came a point where it was pretty clear that, the stalemate was going to go on. So you have to remember that we were prepared for a long labor dispute. We knew, the board knew that if we were going to take this on, we couldn't become impatient in 3 months, we couldn't become impatient in 6 months, we couldn't even become impatient in a year. We had prepared ourselves mentally to know that to make the kind of change that was necessary, you had to have the patience to hold it out. And so as hard as it was to not have the orchestra playing and to have all the abuse that was going on, and then to see all the other things that were going on that most people don't know about, it was really hard. But we were prepared for how long that was going to last because we felt so strongly that to make a significant change to the sustainability was required. So neither party was willing. We tried, we brought in probably the greatest mediator on the, earth to try. It was a failure. And then there was a point at which, Richard Davis and I, he was my negotiating chair and I was the chair. Richard and I talked numerous times every day.
I mean, every day, Richard and I talk to each other, send emails to each other every day, trying to figure out what to do. Believe me, Richard and I every day would get up. I mean, our days we usually started emailing each other around 6 o'clock. Usually 6 in the morning, the first emails would start between Richard and I, trying to figure out what we were going to do in the day. And there was a point, probably around in late August, early September, when we both said, you know what, we're going to have to find a resolution, because this is headed for a whole nother year. This isn't going anywhere. And so that's when we began to, and then we had to go get the board aligned. Because remember, up until this point, the board was still saying, hold your ground, hold your ground, hold your ground. And so we then went back to the board, and we gave the board a set of options and said, what could you live with? And so, you know, if I look back on it, two things I'd say that wasn't your question, but I'll give it to you. What might we have done differently? One, we probably underestimated the ability to make the change in one step. It's probably an underestimation that we calculated wrong. You know, to make as big a change to create a balanced budget all in once was probably too much. And so it was a miscalculation likely. We talked about it, we thought about it, we did everything we could, but we consciously said we were going to take it in one step, and that was probably a mistake. Second, you know, some of the professionals around the edges, and I don't mean the musicians, I mean some of the other professionals involved didn't help this situation. And I don't want to say more than that, because they had really no reason to help us get together. And frankly, in some cases, some of the professionals involved actually created a fair amount of trouble. And so we maybe should have been quicker to have gone around the professionals, but we chose not to. At the end of the day, it's over. It's going to take time to rebuild, but we made a start. You know, the deficit's no longer $6 or $7 million a year. It's probably $3 million a year. And that endowment will now last 10 years, not 5 years. But here's the real hope. So everybody hang with me here. Here's my hope. I hope that it created enough attention that every ticket for every concert is sold, and that all the people who had a lot of opinions about what should happen are starting to contribute to make a difference. So if we accomplished one thing, that we drew enough attention to get people off their butts to actually stand up for what they believe in, then it was probably worthwhile. If not, I don't know what Richard and I wasted our time on.
So in honor of our long-standing relationship, there's stuff here for you, John. This is like that guy at the Twins park that shoots the T-shirts up in the air. And
I think I'm going to need.
I don't think I can do
is it
this
a
one.
Scarf?
No, it's not a scarf.
Oh, darn.
You may need that right now.
Yeah, exactly.
And a mug and an honorary Augie. Thank you very much. So I hope you'll all join us down the hall. We'll continue just a reception right down the hall here, and I know John will stay for a while. And we're just so grateful for your wonderful presentation and candor, and look forward to next year's series of Strommen Executive Series. Thanks.